everyone, my name is Mark Wiggins with Big Mountain Studio. We're in Vermont and we're celebrating with my family and friends at a swimming hole. Woo! Keep watching and I hope you enjoy this next video. Woo! Oh, it's cold!
Hi everyone, my name is Mark Moikins from Big Mountain Studio. If you're interested in iOS development, consider subscribing and clicking that bell icon so you can get notified when I come out with new videos on iOS development. Okay, in this video, we're going to talk about how to access the photo library and select photos. And for our app, these photos will represent our trip. And as you can see in the preview, we're going to start with our Add Trip pop-up. And when you select a photo, we're going to make it the background of the pop-up. And then when you click Save, it'll go back to the main screen and the cell will have that photo as the background. Now later, these images will become the background for the next screen that we navigate to when you select a trip. You'll also learn how to handle a situation where the user does not want our app to access the photo library, but then later they change their mind. So we're going to give them an easy way to change that setting. Okay, in order to pick a photo from the photo library, we will have to use the UI Image Picker controller. Now the Picker controller is actually a view controller, and it has a few screens that you can use to take pictures, record videos, and choose items from the user's media library. We're just interested in showing that last one, the Photo Library Picker view. So once we create an instance of the UI Image Picker controller, we specify which screen we want to see by setting the source type property. And for our app, we want to access the photo library, which is that last screen. There are a few more steps involved in showing the photo library in our app, such as requesting permission from the user, but I'll go over that in code. Okay, so let's head into our project and complete the initial steps of opening the photo library. We're going to run into some problems, and I'm going to show you how to solve them. Okay, before we go into our project, we're going to go into Bitbucket and look at our project and our tasks on our board. And the last thing we did was add validation to our Add Trip pop-up, the text field. So we're done that. We're going to move that over into the Done column. And now what we're going to do this week is add a photo to our trip. Okay, we are in the project for the itinerary app. And one of the first things I want to change is this trip model. Right now the trip model just has an ID and a title. But we also want it to hold an image, right? So let's add the ability to add an image. I'm just going to call it image, and it's going to store a UI image. And you notice there's no autocomplete for this, and that's because we're not importing the UIKit framework. So let's do that. And then we should see it here. UI image, there we go. And I'm going to make this an optional because it can be nil. We don't require an image, but we do want to change the initializer to pass in an image just in case the user wants to set one. And we're going to make it optional, and by default we'll set it to nil just in case nothing's passed in. Okay, that looks good for our model. Now let's go into the UI. On the UI we're going to need two things. We're going to need a UI image view so we can see which image was selected, and we'll also need a button so we can open up the photo picker. So I'm going to add a UI image view. I'll stretch it out to fit the whole thing. And I'm going to adjust the measurements here, the constraints, so it fills the whole pop-up view. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to move it all the way to the back. And I just do that by dragging it and dropping it. So it's the first one under pop-up UI view. This is in the back, and this button is all the way in the front. So we need a button to open up the photo picker. So let's add a button. I'll put it right up there in the corner. And let's adjust the position so it stays up in the corner. As you can see in the preview, this will stay up in the corner no matter what size it becomes. And this is going to be an image of that camera that I had before. And just to let you know, I already did add a camera icon. And this is a PDF. And I changed a couple of properties on it. So I chose PDF because I want it to be able to scale the different sizes. So what I did is I changed it to template image. That'll allow it to use the tint color whatever you select for the tint color. It'll adopt that color instead of black. And then I changed it to single scale, because if it's PDF, it doesn't have to render out the different sizes. Okay, back on our storyboard, I'm going to change that image to the camera. All right. Now, also what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to just stretch it out just to make it a little bit bigger. That way, if we make the button a little bit bigger, it'll be easier for a user to tap it with their finger. Okay, let's create some outlets, because once we select a photo, we'll need to reference that image view so we can assign the image to it. And then we also need an action outlet for that button, so when we click it, we can open up the photo picker. So I'm going to make some space here, and we're just going to create an outlet right here. We'll start with the image view, and I think I'll just call this image view. And I'm going to create an action outlet right down here, and I'll call this add photo. But first we'll make it an action outlet and have it pass in a UI button. I like to pass in a UI button just so when I look at this action outlet, I know it's a button tap. Okay, I'm going to add some extra space here just so I can scroll up more. Now, when we click this button, what's the first thing we want to do? Well, believe it or not, we first have to check if the photo library is available. And that might seem kind of strange, because isn't there a photo library on everyone's device? There is. But the weird thing here is if there's no photos inside the photo library, it'll create an error. So the first thing I need to do is check to see if it's available. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say UI image picker controller .is source type available, and we're checking if the photo library is available. So again, the reason why I'm checking if source type is available is because if there are no photos in the photo library, this will return false, and we won't even try to open up the photo library because there's nothing in there. And if we try to open it up and there's nothing in there, I think it creates an error. So we're going to check if it's available first. And then after that, we want to request authorization to go into the photo library, because by default, your app does not have access to the different parts of the iPhone, including the photo library. So the user has to grant our app permission to go into the photo library in the first place. So that's the first thing I'm going to do, is request authorization into the photo library. And to do that, I need to use this photo library class. But notice there's no autocomplete again, because that photo library class is actually in a different framework that I need to import. So let's import that, and it's just called photos. There we go, that looks better. And we're going to request authorization, and for this I'm just going to hit enter, and I'll just enter in status. And this status basically represents if the user selected yes or no. So we need to handle if they selected yes or if they selected no. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use a switch status, and then we're going to check the case for each value for status. So here are the different statuses. If it's authorized, that means the user said yes, our app can go into their photo library. Or they said no, and it's denied. Not determined means we're not quite sure yet. So there's a different handling we have to do there. Or restricted means that maybe the owner of the phone said nobody can access their photo library. So when they give their phone to their child, they can't go into their photo library. So that's when you run into a restricted status there. And I'll show you how to handle that. So for now, we're going to handle just the authorized, the case where they say, yes, you can access the photo library. Okay, if they're authorized, then what we're going to do, we have to do two things to show this image picker. We create an instance of UI image picker controller, then we set its source type to the photo library. And from there, we just present it. So let's create that view controller. Okay, now we have our view controller. Then we just have to set a property on there, the source type. And we just basically have to tell it that we want to access the photo library, not the camera. And then we're going to present it. And it will be animated. And for completion, there's nothing we want to run after we show the view controller, so I'm just going to delete this. It's an optional parameter, so it's not required. Okay, before I can run this, we're getting an error here. And it says that the switch must be exhaustive. What does that mean? Well, we saw before that the status has 4 different values. So it wants us to handle each of those values. For example, if I click fix, then it puts the other 3 values in there. But for right now, we're not going to worry about that. And instead, what I'll do is this. I'll say default and break. So what this does, default just says, if it's anything but authorized, come down here and run this code. And we don't have any code. But I put a break in there so it just exits the switch. Okay, let's run this now as it is and see how it looks. Okay, it doesn't look so hot because it's up under this notch. So we must not have run this before on iPhone X. And you can see we will have to move this down a little bit. And also my icon is still blue. So we'll have to change the tint color. But if we click it, let's see what happens. Okay, it looks like we're getting an error. And this is one of the errors that I was telling you about that we're going to run into. So the key is to look at the output in the console down below. And it says this app has crashed because it attempted to access privacy sensitive data without a usage description. So what does that mean? Well, Apple has restricted access to all the private parts of your phone. and so you need to get permission to go into those areas. And the photo library is one of those privacy sensitive areas. So your app can't access a lot of the things on the iPhone until it gets permission from the user first. And when it requests permission, you have to tell the user what you're going to be doing with it. And that is the usage description. What am I going to be using your photo library for? So we have to provide that. And how do we do that? Well, if you keep reading that message, it says the app's info plist must contain that photo library usage description key with the value explaining to the user how your app uses this data. So that's what we're going to do. We're going into the info plist and we're going to add that. Okay, now I know they gave you a different key, but all you have to do to find it is just start typing in privacy. And here you'll see all the different parts of the iPhone that you need a usage description for now. And one of them is photo library, so we want that one. And in this app, we want to access the user's photo library so we can add a picture for trips. And we also want the user to be able to add photos to their itinerary as well when they go on to the next screen. So we'll keep it kind of generic and we'll just say, use photos to add more details to your trips. Okay, let's run it now and see if this fixes it. It does. And here you see the usage description. It says smaller text under the title. Okay, for now we'll just say OK. And it brings up the photo library. And then when you select a photo, nothing happens. It goes away, but how do we know which photo was selected and what do we do with it? So that's what we're going to learn next. But first, let's fix this UI a little bit so we don't keep seeing the pop-up under that notch. Okay, I'm just going to select that pop-up and we're going to drag it down a little bit. Let's just round it out to 50. Now, we also want to change this color, and you do that by changing the tint. So here's a little tip. I can change the tint here by selecting tint. We had created a named color for our tint color here. But there's different ways you can add a tint to your buttons. You can either supply it to every button, and that might be a lot of work if you have a lot of buttons or a lot of controls like this on your screen. What you can also do is go up to the view that contains all of your buttons and interactive controls that have a tint. And you can also change the tint there. And that will change the tint for all the controls inside that UI view. Now, if you don't want to do that, you can also go one step higher and you can change it on this view. Or if you want to change the tint globally for the whole app, then you come to this tab right here, the File Inspector, and you can change the global tint here. And we can come here and select tint, and it changes it for all view controllers everywhere. So that's an easy way to change your tint all in one place. You just come to the File Inspector and go down to Global Tint and change it there. So we'll do that for now. And let's run that and we'll just see how that looks. Alright, that looks good. It's down far enough and everything's the right color. Okay, we've got the photo library showing up, but when we select a photo, nothing happens. How do we know which photo was selected, and where do we populate the UI image view to the photo selected? Well, the UI image picker controller has a delegate property. And as you might know from some of my other videos, a delegate allows you to supply your own code to a different class. And that's just what we're going to do. We're going to use the add_trip_view_controller to supply code to the UI image picker controller to tell the picker what to do when the user selects a photo. Okay, let's go back into our project and implement the UI image picker controller's delegate. Okay, we're back in our project, and where do we actually want to set this delegate property? Well, we want to go to where we created our picker controller. And that is when the user is authorized, we instantiate our picker controller here. So now we have an instance, we can set the delegate property. And when you set a delegate property, you can set it to any class. You can create a class and you can conform to this delegate, but we're just going to use this existing view controller class, the add_trip_view_controller, and we're going to use that class to supply the code to the delegate. So we'll just say self. Okay, now what we have to do, and as you can see, it's giving us a problem because it says our view controller doesn't implement the UI image picker controller delegate and the UI navigation controller delegate. See, this one's kind of funny. When you use the image picker, you actually have to conform to two different classes. And I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm not going to click fix here because that's the wrong thing to do in this case. Instead, what I'm going to do is create an extension of this view controller, the add_trip_view_controller, and conform to the appropriate protocols. So let's do that here and create some more space. There we go. Okay, I'll say extension. And which class do we want to create an extension of? It's going to be this one, the add_trip_view_controller. And on this extension, this is where I'm going to implement those two classes that we're talking about. This is the delegate we want to implement. And we also want to implement the UI navigation controller. So why the navigation controller? What is this? Well, the reason why we want to implement that protocol is because you notice when we go to our UI picker controller, I don't know if you noticed this, but it had a back arrow up at the top, and that's basically the navigation controller. So if we want to cancel out of what we're doing, we can easily navigate back to where we were. And iOS provides that to us for free. Okay, so what do we have to implement here? First of all, let's look at this error here. Oh, you know, I made a mistake. It's the delegate I want to implement, not the controller itself. There we go, the delegate. So what do we have to implement here? If you ever forget, you can just do this. You can hold down Command, right click, and it'll take you into the protocol itself. And as you can see, there's two functions here. Right now, we're just interested in the image picker controller did finish picking media with info. So let's implement that. And I want to point out something else too. This image picker controller did cancel. Usually you implement that, but it is optional. Let me see if it gives more information here. No, it doesn't. But basically, if you look at the help file, you'll see that it is optional, but iOS says it's also expected too. So we'll implement that one after. But for now, we're just interested in this one. The did finish picking media with info. So let's go back here. And this is the one we want right here. So hit enter. Okay, now the first thing we want to do is we want to be able to get the image that was selected, right? And here's how you do that. You just say if let, this is your selected image, equals, and then you want to access this info parameter here, right here. And you notice this info, it's has a key value. It's an array with a key value. So what we need to do is we need to use the right key to get the image. And the key we want to use here is UI image picker controller original image. There it is right there. And you notice it's a string. Okay, and that will return our image, but we need to cast it as a UI image. Because you'll notice the other part that it returns is a any, which means it could be any type. So we have to tell it, hey, this is an image. It's not a string. It's not a Boolean. We just need the exclamation there. Actually, no, we don't want the exclamation. We want the question mark because it could be nil. So this is just saying if you have an image, if an image was selected, then put it into this variable. Then once we have that image and we know it's not nil, we can set it to our UI image view. There we go. Okay, then after we set the image, we can dismiss this view controller now, the image picker view controller. And we'll just say true, completion is nil, or if you want, you can just delete that altogether because it's optional. Okay, let's try that and see how it works. There it is. You can see the waterfall and the image is kind of being stretched, right? So we can change that, right? We can change the mode. So let's do that. Okay, content mode, here we go. So right now it's scaling to fit, and that's why it looks like it's stretched. But what we want is we want it to maintain its aspect ratio, and we want it to fill the image as well. So that should work just fine. Yeah, it's better. Okay, so what is happening here? So the image is actually going outside the bounds of its parent UI view. And so what we want to do is we want to just cut that off. But watch what happens here. What we could do is we could come in here and clip the bounds on the UI view. And what that'll do is that'll cut off anything that goes outside of these bounds right here. But what it also means is the shadow for this UI view goes outside the bounds, right? And we still want the drop shadow to be there. So if we use clip to bounds here, it's going to cut off our drop shadow. So we don't want to do that. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the image view and I'm going to clip its bounds so it cuts itself off when it goes outside the pop-up UI view. But what will also happen is the corner radius will disappear. So let me show you here. So notice when the image is shown, it no longer has a corner radius on this pop-up. Before, when we show the pop-up, you see this nice rounded corner radius. But as soon as we select a photo, corner radius is gone. That's because it's showing the corners of the image, not the UI view. So we need to add a corner radius to this image as well. So let's do that. And we can just do that right in the view did load. Say image view, and corner radius is on the layer. And we just set it to 20. I believe it's 20. Like, we can look at our resources here and look at our extensions, UI view extension. Oh no, it's 10. Okay, so let's do that. Let's give it a corner radius of 10 instead. There we go. So now we still have the corner radius and the drop shadow as well. So everything looks fine there. This add trip, sometimes that gets hard to read, so we're going to fix that too. Before we fix that, let's go back down to our extension here where we implement the picker controller delegate. Now remember when we went in here, there's this other one here that did cancel. And like I said before, it is expected. It's optional, but it is expected. So what we can do you know, maybe later on Apple will require it again. So let's just be safe. I know it's optional, but let's just add it just in case. And I'm just going to say dismiss. There we go. All right, now let's go in and fix that title. And there's different ways to do this. There's different ways to fix this title. I have a different video where I show multiple ways of fixing it. One easy way is you can just come to this shadow right here and maybe give it a white. So it has a white drop shadow. And you can kind of see it right here. Like, let's zoom in a little bit. It adds that white drop shadow. I tend to like 1 and 1 for the width and height. Drop it down that way. Let's see how that looks. Can't really see it too much here. So let's select a photo that has a darker background up in the corner like this one. And it looks a little bit better, right? So at least you can read that title a little bit better. But there's another option where you can give it a shadow, like a white shadow, instead of this drop shadow, like this, where it's more blurred, I guess you could say. And you just do it in code. So first what I'm going to do is undo this, just change it to default and get rid of it. And we'll have to do it in code. And what is that? It's called the title label. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on its shadow, which, you know, every UI object has a shadow. It's just the opacity is set to 0 so you can't see it. So I'm going to turn it on by changing its opacity to 1, and then I'm going to change the shadow color to white. Okay, that should do it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the position so the shadow is right in the center of the object. So it has a nice even shadow, like a nice even consistent shadow all around the letters. And basically all the properties I'm setting all begin with shadow, so they're all easy to find. What I want to do is change the offset. And to keep it right in the center, you just say CG size .0. So that puts it right in the center. And one more thing is I'm going to make the shadow radius come out a little bit more. And you do that with the shadow radius here. It's the blur, like how far it goes out. And I'm going to change it to 5. By default, I think it's 3. Let's double check here. I can hold down Command, right click. Yeah, let's go to shadow radius. Yeah, default's to 3. So we're just going to make it just a little bit bigger. And let's see how that looks. We'll choose the darker one. I think that looks better, so I'm going to keep it this way. It just has a shadow around all the letters. It's pretty consistent. Okay, everything's looking great, so what's next? What is there left to do? Okay, we just want to handle the other situations that we were talking about, the other statuses that you can get when you request access to the photo library. So we want to handle the situation specifically where the user says, don't give this app access to my photo library, but then later they change their mind and they say, oh yeah, I do want to access the photo library. We're using this app. So I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so let's go back into our code here, and specifically let's go back here. So we're going to handle these situations right here. And we'll get rid of the default and the break. Okay, not determined. This one will be pretty easy to handle. Basically, if you come into not determined, you just want to check the status and check to see if it is authorized. And if it is authorized, then we want to present our view controller. So it's basically this code right here. Now, normally you don't want duplicate code. So if I want to make a change to this code, specifically to the picker controller, I'd have to change it in 2 places, right? So what I want to do is I want to extract this code right here into its own function. So let's do that. Let's go into refactor and we'll extract a method here. And for the function name, you want it to be kind of descriptive as far as like what it's doing. And what it's going to do is it's going to present the photo picker like that. And this, we're going to need self on this. Okay, then I'm just going to copy this and reuse it here. There we go. Okay, now for restricted, What this means is if you go into your iPhone settings and you go into general, you'll see a section in there called restrictions. When you run into the restricted status here, maybe you just want to tell the user, hey, you can't access the photo library at this time because you're not allowed. Something like that. So we basically just want to show an alert and tell them, you can't access the photo library at this time because it's restricted. So let's do that. Let's create an alert. And we'll just give it a title like libraries restricted, and we'll give them a message. Something simple like that. And this will be an alert. There we go. And we'll just add an OK button to it. And as far as a handler, I don't want anything to happen when they click OK. So I'm just going to delete that because it's optional. Okay, then we want to add that button to the alert. All right, there we go. Okay, for the denied status, it'll come into this status if they previously said, no, I don't want to allow this app access to my photo library. So this is where we want to tell them, hey, if you still want to go into your photo library, you'll have to go into your settings at this point to turn it back on or to turn it on. Because once they deny access to it, you can't allow them access using your app. You have to tell them to go into settings. But we can make it as easy as possible for them. So here's what we'll do. We'll just copy this because we're going to show another alert. And instead we'll just say denied. And then we'll change the message here. We'll just say it was previously denied. There we go. And instead of OK, we'll say go to settings. And settings is an app, so I think what I'll do is I'll just capitalize settings here. Okay, it'll be the default. And in this case, I do want to run some code when they click go to settings. So I'll do this. Okay, and to take them to settings, you do it through what's called a URL. So in a URL, you can format things in a specific way that iOS knows about, and they can read the URL and they know what to do with it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to create a URL, and in order for it to work correctly, we'll have to run it on the main thread. So just to make sure we're on the main thread, because it is a UI action, we're just going to use the dispatch queue. Get on the main thread here. We'll make it async, and then we'll create our URL. And we want the one that is a string. There we go. And we want it to open the settings here. So this is the one I actually want right here. And you can see here, use to create a URL that you can pass into OpenURL method. When you open the URL built from this string, it launches the settings app. And that's exactly what we want. Okay, so we have our URL, and then we're just going to open it. And our URL is that. Whoops. Okay, we don't need any options, and we don't need a completion handler. Looks like the options is required. It's not optional. So I'm just going to click enter. But on this, we'll just pass in nothing. So I'll just delete it. We'll pass in an empty array like that. The completion handler is optional. You can tell by that question mark on the end. So I'm just going to delete this altogether. All right, not unwrapped. Okay. So for here, I'm just going to put an exclamation point on there because we are getting it from a constant here. So I know it's going to have a value. I trust that it's going to have value. If I don't trust it, I can just use an if let, which you can do like this, if let URL. That's another way you can do it. But like I said, I trust that it's going to exist. Okay, so this is another way to handle it. All right, I think this is, no, we're missing something here, aren't we? I call this a OK action. This is actually go to settings action. So I'm going to rename this. No, it's going to rename both of them. Okay, looks like I'll have to do it manually. So let's cancel that rename there. Now we also want a cancel action as well. So let's add that. And I'm going to use the cancel style. And there's no handler. Now if you wanted to, you could just like take this, copy that, just paste it in there. That'll work as well. I tend to put them on separate lines for debugging, and it's also a little bit more clear when doing tutorials. But I just want to let you know that if you're adding an action, you don't have to put it into a variable and then add the variable. You could just add this whole line, the instantiation of the action itself. All right, let's test this. But in order to test this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to deny access first, and then I'm going to grant access by going into my settings. So in order to test this, I have to go into my simulator and delete my app because I've already granted access to the photo library. So let's go into our simulator. I'm just going to delete this app here. Click done. And then let's run it again. Because we want it to prompt us again, right? And see if we want to grant it access. Okay, don't allow. No, you can't. Okay, we cancel that. And then if the user comes back in and they say, oh, I want to add a picture. Oh, you know what? I never presented the alert, right? Okay, so we got to do that. I actually didn't present it on either of these. Present my alert. There we go. We have no completion handler. And I probably just use that same line here. All right, let's try it again. Oh, I need self in there. Okay, here we go. So photo library was denied. Photo library, maybe we should say photo library access denied. Yeah, let's say that. Photo library access. Okay, photo library access was previously denied. Please update your settings if you wish to change this. So the person says, yes, I do want to change that. Go to settings. It opens up settings. And as we can see here, this is for our itinerary app. And we go to photos and we say read and write. So that will grant it access now. So if we run it again, oh, notice when we changed it, it actually shut our app down. That will happen on the phone too. There we go. So now it actually goes into our photo library, and it doesn't ask us if we want to access it because we went directly into settings and said you can access it. Sign a photo. There we go. Okay, and we have one more change. Of course, if we save this now, oh, we need a name. So let's see. Let's say we're planning a Ukraine trip. Save that, and we have Ukraine. So now this, I gotta get rid of that too, that selection. But what we need to do is we need to add a photo to our cell here and show the image that we selected, right? Okay, good. So that cell, that's a custom cell, and that's going to be right here. And we're going to need a outlet for it. So let's go into our storyboard and let's find the card view. Okay, yeah, we want to add the image view to this card view. Let's just zoom in here a little bit. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to have it fill the whole thing. Just like that. All right. We need to set the constraints so it fills the whole thing. And remember last time we had to change the content mode. So let's just do that now because we know we'll have to. Aspect fill, that should be fine. And then we want it to be in the back. Okay, and we'll also have to take the same actions that we did before as far as the clipping it and giving it a corner radius. So let's just turn on clip to bounds on the image view. And then in our cell, well, of course, we'll need to create an outlet for it. So let's do that too. And we're in the wrong one. Automatic, let's go to the cell. And then for our image, just create it here. So I'll call it trip image. trip image view. There we go. And I just have to give it a corner radius. And for the corner radius on this, I don't remember what it was. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to use the same corner radius that I set on the card view, since I have a reference to that. That way if I ever change the card view, it'll change it here too. Okay, then we just want to set that image. We already created a property on our model .image. So we just get the image from there. Because what will happen is when we save it, it'll save it directly to our model. Oh, you know what? We didn't actually do that, did we? Yeah, so we'll have to do that. We created this property on our trip model, but we never assigned it a value when we click save on the add trip view controller. So let's go into there. When we click save here, we want to save the image. So let's go up here, save. Here we are. And this is where we're actually creating the trip model. So what I'm going to do is just add image here. I believe this is what it was. This is where it was. And we need, let's just double check it. Image, yeah. And we'll just get this from our outlet. There we go. So this property is optional. So if it's nil, we can just pass a nil and it'll still work. All right, let's try it now and see how that works. And we need a name. There we go. All right, that looks fine. There is something a little bit off about it. It does look bigger than the rest. So let's figure out what's going on there. So there's a few things that we have to fix. We have to fix that size. I also want to fix the selection. I don't want this to be selected like this. So let's go into our storyboard controller and let's click on the table itself. Okay, the table is selected. Now here's the wrong thing to do. You don't want to change it to no selection, because then what'll happen is, there's that function did select row at, and we're going to need that to navigate to the details of our trip, to look at our itinerary. So you can change it to no selection. That will prevent it from being selected, and it will prevent the view from changing. But if you just know that if you turn it off, the did select row at won't work. So let's go into the cell, and you see this selection here, it says blue. You want to change it to none. And that should fix that. So let's take a look. There we go. Notice nothing happens when I select them. So that's perfect. That's exactly what I want. The size gets bigger too, right? There's something else I don't like. I don't like these lines. And this is going to be a really weird way to get rid of this. The way I get rid of it is I just add a UI view. And it basically becomes a footer to the table. And you can just make it clear. And then I'm just going to change the height to 1. There we go. That'll get rid of the extra lines at the bottom, but you still have this line in between the cells. So to get rid of the line between the cells, so what you want to do is you want to go to the table view and go to the separator and just change it to none. And that should get rid of the line altogether. Alright, that looks a lot better. Okay, then we still have the problem with the image being too big, right? Select an image, click save, and now it looks like it's too big. Something's happening there. So let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at the card view. Now the card view is fine because it shows up fine when we show the other cells, right? It's just with the image. So let's take a look at the image. And this looks fine, but it looks like this is the problem right here. We actually want to start at 0 because it should be just the size of the card view. And I think what I did is I made it the size of the content view. So let's make it the size of the card view, which is kind of hard to tell because there's no color or anything. And let's run that. I think that will fix it. I think we just had the wrong size. I made it too big to fit the content view instead of the card view. Yeah, there we go. All right, that looks good. All right, good. That wraps up on how to access the photo library. This was a longer video because we did a lot of different things and I taught you a lot of things besides just accessing the photo library. But in order to remember how to access the photo library, first you instantiate the UI image picker controller and set some properties like setting the source type property to photo library. Then if the user allows your app to access their photo library, you present the controller so they can select a photo. And lastly, you implement the controller's delegate function, the did finish picking media with info, so you can get the image that was selected. Alright guys, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Consider sharing it on social media like Twitter or Facebook. And if you subscribe and click the bell icon, you'll get notified when the next video comes out in this series. If you'd like to help out my channel, you can provide a translation for the title and description of this video, or any other video, in your native language, so people in your country will have an easier time finding this information. Alright, thanks guys.